Make sure you're all unmuted for now.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi, everyone.
There you go.
Hi, Chris. There's our long lost cousin
Hello.
that we didn't know. We're going to find you in some geological history at some point. You know that, don't you? It's going to come up sooner or later. I keep looking.
Yeah.
So I don't see anybody else yet. I guess Dr. Sirconti hasn't hooked up his audio, his video yet. Why doesn't he have his video on? Maybe he doesn't want to be on. That's okay. There he is. Hi. There you are, Doctor.
Hi, everybody.
I see you have a glass of wine in your hand already. Hope somebody else does. I've already finished half of mine. In our pre-conference call. So,
I'm seeing a family resemblance with the Wolves.
there you go.
yeah, Randy, I like your background.
It must be my imagination. Yeah, actually, that's the wine we're going to talk about came from right behind me.
Good.
That's out the back, out of our back deck right now. We're living in the guest house, so that's out the back deck looking down the hillside. So, and what you can see in the very far corner, or back corner, I don't know if my thing will show it, are a bunch of rocks, which is, that's what we're on, bedrock up here. So.
Yeah, we moved a lot of rocks to plant that vineyard that you see.
And it took about 2 years to get the permits because it's more than a 15% slope down that hillside. So, and it's all close row planted. So it's there. Victoria can tell you she's slipped a few times going down those rows. Anyway, we'll get started and people can come. Oh, here's your brothers here too, Randy. Here comes John. He's got to come in soon. And Ryan, your son, uh-oh. I'm glad I'm not talking about climate and climate change.
Is he going to?
I know, but he's Noah, so he knows the ocean drift and the ocean breezes that come in. So we were just talking about you, Ryan. We better be correct, or you better correct us from Noah's perspective if we don't get it right about the climate up here.
I'll try my best. It's a different branch of the agency, but I can fix it.
Okay. Well, we'll start then, and I'll just let people in as they come in. I'll just keep watching over there. So hello, and thanks for hanging in. This is our 7th Wine Wednesday. Can you believe that? 7 solid weeks in a row, and probably 2 more before that when we were put on lockdown. So for this one, we wanted to talk to you about our mountain and our mountain fruit up here on Atlas Peak. And the star for the day is the 2015 Cabernet from Atlas Peak. And we hope you have some in your glass. But if you don't, not to worry, you'll find some somewhere. I've already started on mine, so I'm a little ahead here. But I'm going to start with some background, and then Randy and Victoria will take over after that. So Atlas Peak, which you all know, is located in the Napa Valley. It's on the western slopes of the Vaca Mountain Range. The valley itself sits in between the Vaca Mountain Range and the Mayacamas Mountain Range. That's where the slope is down into the valley. That's Napa Valley itself. But we're on the western slope of the Vaca Mountain Range. And the Vaca Mountain Range actually separates Napa Valley from Sacramento Valley, which I thought was very interesting. It's also within 40 miles of the San Francisco Bay and the Pacific Ocean. So we have some of those influences at the same time. Atlas Peak's highest elevation is 2663, 2,663 feet, and our home and vineyards at 1,350 feet. So we're not quite to the top. There's still more beyond our property. The whole area of the Atlas Peak appellation itself encompasses 11,000 acres. So most experts agree that the soil in which grapevines grow can have a substantial impact on the grape's character. Virtually all of the soils in Atlas Peak, in this area, are derived from a volcanic source material. So we were part of an ancient volcanic disturbance. a few years ago, Victoria brought up a geologist to the property and they walked around the vineyards. And I think you can correct me, Victoria, but I think he said that he determined that our rocks on the property itself were 10 to 12 million years old, which is a mere baby in geological terms. So that's the basic background. And I thought I'd let Randy tell you about our little corner up here, or what I call my little slice of heaven up here on Atlas Peak. So Randy?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is you don't have to worry about laying your wine down for 10 to 12 million years. Fortunately, you know, the French like to talk a lot about something called terroir, which is essentially you want the wine to be an expression of a particular location. And Atlas Peak is really, I think, one of the unique places in the world. And that's one of the reasons why we've settled here in terms of some of our grape growing. We actually own 42 acres up on Atlas Peak, but we've only planted about 4. What you see behind me is one of the blocks, the largest of the 4 blocks. Then we have 3 other blocks spread around. But basically, it's an effort, first of all, to find something that is sufficiently level, that's sufficiently cultivatable, and anyway, something that where it's cost effective to be able to move the rocks, because as I said earlier, we moved a lot of rocks, big rocks. There's no question that we're on bedrock up here. What we planted initially on Atlas Peak was Cabernet Sauvignon, because it's just dead solid perfect for Cabernet Sauvignon, at least in my opinion. We chose to what they call close row plant the vineyards up here, which basically just means that the spacing is tighter than conventional spacing. Most conventional spacing is determined by how wide it needs to be to get a tractor down the row, because it's a lot cheaper to maintain the grapes if you can use tractors. By spacing at 3 feet by 4 feet, we have our vines closer together, but as a result, we have to do all of the tending by hand rather than tractors. So no tractors. And that, again, makes for a more labor-intensive product. But one of the advantages of close row planting, other than just getting more vines per acre, is that the vine roots struggle not only against the rocks and the soil, but they struggle with each other. They compete with each other for turf. And stressed or struggling vines tend to produce lower yields but more concentrated flavors, and that's something that we're interested in. So I sometimes think of these vines as the hardest working vines in show business. They struggle, they fight to survive, but what we end up with are very extracted and wonderfully flavored berries. Those of you that are familiar with our wines know that we make two entirely different Cabernet Sauvignons. We make one from the valley floor, and we make one from up on Atlas Peak. And there are differences other than the 1,300 feet of elevation. The soil quality and the climate are also fundamentally different. And if you taste them side by side, the Atlas Peak Cab is a little bit bigger flavor. To me, it's more, I guess I get flavors like forest floor and black tea and minerally qualities that I don't necessarily get from the valley floor. The valley floor, where the growing is easy, it tends to be juicier and more fruit forward and a little bit smoother. So the Atlas Peak Cab is our big dog, and I actually think of it as our flagship wine. It's not just our most expensive wine, in part because of what it costs to produce, but it's also got probably the biggest flavor profile. So that's the Atlas Peak Cab. So let me let you hear from the person who actually makes the wine. Victoria?
Hi, everyone. Chris, you got the bottle?
I got the bottle.
Okay. So for us, 2015 was interesting, just because I think we started out very warm early in the spring, and by the time May came around when we were flowering, temperatures had dropped, and we had just poor fruit set from the flowers that didn't develop. And so we ended up throughout the valley, probably the valley itself, maybe 25 to 30% of the crop was lost, but up on Atlas Peak, because we're a little bit behind compared to the rest of the valley. It's a little bit cooler up where we are. We lost about 65%. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah. About the number of cases that we usually produce. We made 150 where we're typically around 450 probably. That's what I think. And so that made it different for me in that vintage, because we had a lot less Cabernet, and we had to use everything that we had just to get a decent production of wine. But it ended up being 19% Merlot, which in all the other blends, we use no more than 8%. So going into this wine, so it's just, I recognize it as Atlas Peak. You can definitely tell the difference between, you can still tell it represents the vineyard, and still has the same flavor profiles, but the mouthfeel to me is completely different. And maybe the intensity of the fruit has shifted. Usually it's a lot of black fruit, and maybe you find a little more red this time, maybe more black cherry. And I love the descriptor black tea, because that's what I always recognized in the wine when it was solely Cabernet. And over the years, that's just been warming up, because we are in a cooler area of Atlas Peak. Because it's been warming, we've gotten maybe riper flavors. And now I feel like almost the black tea is there, but then now the wines become a little more floral and a little more pretty, I guess, more elegant. So, or it's a big cab, it's still very elegant. And try it. Does everyone have it?
Well, she's
Yes.
while she's tasting the wine, some people are fond of talking about the monster cabs in Napa. And just to be clear, that's not something we've ever aspired to. As we've talked about before in some of these Wine Wednesdays, if we have one mantra more than any other, it's balance. We try to make sure that all of our wines are balanced. And so we're not trying to go over the top and produce some 15.8 alcohol fruit bomb that overwhelms your palate. But this vineyard does produce some very, like I say, extracted, concentrated flavors. And the addition of the Merlot and the Petit Verdot really makes the wine, I think, more complicated and more interesting.
And with the soil, there's really no soil up at that property. It's all rock. And so I think there's one tiny little block just outside the driveway that has like a tiny little bit of clay, like mixed in with the soil. So you get, some texture and richness from that. But overall, the vineyard produces pretty, not linear, but a structured wine. And so we can use, your glass almost disappeared, Randy.
Yep.
But
Have the vanishing glass?
yeah.
That's your virtual background.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there it goes.
So the wine tends to be more structured, and so we have to rely a lot on the barrels to maybe, I think I spoke a little bit in the previous talks that we've had about using barrels just to lengthen the finish and fill the middle and make it maybe a little more, wines tend to be dry, so maybe we find some that will make it a little sweet. So we get to play around with the barrels a lot for that, like a spice rack, I guess. And
we're losing your audio a little, Victoria. Turned up. But when you said a little more floral, I immediately smell violets when I try the nose.
Yeah, I get violets from it lately, as of late, these past few vintages. So more so than the black tea, but that still shows through. And then you also get, I think with this wine, there's black cherry, you get some like orange citrus, the rind, but there's a lot of spice to it. And we had the opportunity just with the 2015 Napa Cab, because we had less crop, we had more barrels than we had grapes. And so I was able to
Yep.
go where we're typically at 6%.
We're losing
Can you
him.
hear me?
Now we can't.
Now we can.
Okay. I was saying with having more barrels and fewer grapes, fewer tonnage, that we were able to use a greater percentage. So the wine's a little spicier than it would typically be. So you get like a lot of some espresso and cocoa from it as well. But we were able to take advantage of that oak like we did for the 2015 Napa Cab as well.
Did you talk, Victoria, about 2015 being part of the drought era here in the valley? Is that why we
We just had that, it was just that warm early springs for early bud break, and then we had the cool weather come in at flowering, so we didn't have as many of the flowers develop and set for fruit, so we had less fruit for that reason. Then after that, it was a nice growing season.
Because I think that's typically another part of volcanic soil, is that it doesn't get as much water. And so you have smaller berries and more concentrated fruit in the berries. Is that right?
Well, we've got water to kind of compensate for that. But the smaller berries, yes, and the concentration of flavors. And I remember also the architecture of the.
We lost you. We lost you, kiddo. Victoria, we lost you again.
She's probably trying to do something
Frozen.
about it.
She's frozen in time.
So one of the things I'm going to cover for, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm going to
Yes.
cover for her because one of the things when we get her back that I'd really like her to talk about is the barrel program. Obviously, barrel selection matters a lot with all of our wines, but it's especially important with the Atlas Peak Cab. And Victoria she has a very rigorous program of barrel evaluation every year and decision making about it. So it'd be interesting to hear her talk about it. I hear her frequently compare the barrel selection to the spice rack when you're cooking, and that's probably a pretty good simile. The selection, I was really just kind of overwhelmed initially when we first started selecting barrels. I knew that we only use French barrels, and not to be snobbish, but just because we like them the best. But there are coopers, lots of them in France, who operate out of different forests, and some of them focus entirely on Burgundy wine productions, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and some of them focus exclusively on Bordeaux wine productions, which of course would be Cabernet Sauvignon, Sauvignon Blanc to a lesser degree, Merlot, Petit Verdot, those wines. And but how you zero in on, do you want Baron or do you want Sagan Moreau or do you want Boot or which coopers do you want? And then that's not the end of it. You have to decide then what forest you want the barrel to come from. And then you have to decide what toasting level you want in the barrel. They can toast they literally drop the barrel staves over an oak chip fire and char the inside of the barrel to your specifications. So they can do a light toast, they can do a medium toast, and what they call medium plus. They can do medium long, which is a smaller fire for a longer period of time. They can do a heavy toast, Then you have to decide whether you want the heads of the barrel toasted or not toasted, whether it's going to be a toasted head, because that'll expose more of the juice to the toasted barrel surface. And then you got to do this for every barrel. And every one of these coopers might have 8, 10, 12 different forest selections and stave thicknesses. And the bottom line is, thank heavens, it's the woman who's now vanished who takes care of all of this.
Yeah, I just texted her hoping we could get her back. I don't know what it means. She must have lost her internet connection down there. Could have been. So,
Yeah, because it's what I learned fairly quickly is it's easy for me to taste from different barrels and decide which one tastes better to me. But what I'm I think generally unable to do, but what Victoria does is she'll look at a whole wall full of barrels and project and say, when all of these are put together, they will make the right combination. So you want the whole to be more than the sum of its parts. And so I might taste a barrel and say to Victoria, this barrel is too astringent. I get too much oak tannin out of it. I don't like it. I want smooth. I want silky. And she'll say, well, no, trust me. We only have 2 of these barrels out of the 22. And when we put it in, it's going to add some really helpful structure. And you're gonna like the end product when it's all blended together, is my point. And she's the one who does that, and she does it really extraordinarily well. We're talking about barrel selection, Victoria.
Okay. How far did you get?
he gave a general overview. Do you have any specifics for this Atlas Peak wine?
No, I was saying that it's mostly 100% new. I mean, it's close to that. I started out that way. And
So Victoria, I was talking about the selection of different coopers and the importance of projecting in your mind's eye how they're all going to go together.
right. I mean, some barrels always just show so well all the time. And then there are some where it goes in and out. So you know that it can behave nicely with the wine. And then it just they all end up complementing one another. But I was saying for this wine, because it's a leaner wine that's produced, I try to find barrels that will maybe give it a little more richness and fat, and maybe not so much tannin structure to it. I try to use barrels so like a medium plus toast would give sweetness right off the bat, where you also have a medium long toast. So it's a medium heat over a long temperature. And that's a really like nice spice, subtle, mellow barrel. And so a lot of the barrels are that, because I prefer that on all the wines really. But then you have some with the higher toast level that gives you all the sweetness up front. And you have like the different from 24 to 36 months of seasoning the wood, so that, and the tightness of the grain, that also helps with, giving you a finish, giving you length in the wine, and also filling the middle of your palate.
What on the finish of the wine, what are some of the flavors in this wine that you get that you think are attributable more to the barrel than the fruit?
Well, there's always like not a toastiness, but more of a caramelization, I think. And some of the chocolate, like the cocoa,
Green.
espresso, that would come from it. I think the creaminess, the creaminess can come, that can be expressed through the barrel as well, as far as texturally. There's one barrel that I tend to use it on the Merlot, but I always find in the end, it's like the most refined, polished mouthfeel.
And what's the name of that barrel?
That one is Sylvain.
Sullivan, okay.
And so I tend to, even though we end up blending, but I tend to start the Merlot in that barrel, and we've bottled Merlot coming from that. But then also that's mountain fruit, so you do have some texture from it. But with that barrel, I tend to find it like just makes the wine shine.
In the pleasant homework category, there's a winery called Pine Ridge here. We used to sell a lot of Cabernet to Pine Ridge, and annually for the last several years, one of the things they've done is they've taken the fruit from a single vineyard. They used our vineyard actually a couple of years ago, but they take the fruit from one vineyard and they put it in approximately 35 to 40 different barrels from all different coopers. And then when you arrive late in the morning, it's all blind tasting. So you have these long tables. It's actually difficult to get an invitation to this. And they have the only vintners and winemakers are invited. There are these long tables, and you work your way down the table, and you literally, believe me, you taste and spit. You do not swallow this wine. You taste 30 to 40 different samples, and then you rank them on your sheet. And you rank them basically on, I would never buy this barrel, perhaps I would buy this barrel, or I would buy this barrel. That's it. Very, very straightforward. When you're all done, you kind of, at least I kind of wobble on over to the table, and they take the sheet and they scan it, and they copy it, and they compile the results, and then reveal to everybody what they were, what each Cooper was, and how everybody ranked them, as well as how you ranked them. And all I can tell you is there was a long nap that afternoon.
But when they ranked them and you got the rankings between you two, because I don't go because I don't spit, so I don't. So that doesn't help for that kind of an enterprise. But did you find that we use those barrels, Victoria, or we were going to put them in the barrel program in the next vintage?
Well, some of them we do already use. And then you also have to consider from where their fruit's coming. I know one year they did use Lobo's cab from Oaknell, but the last couple of years they've been using Cabernet from Sonoma, which is so different. So you have to like know what that barrel can do for that type of wine, that comes from, it's not Napa Cab, it's very different. So, maybe a barrel that may show well on what we have. So you have to know what it's giving, and you have to know the fruit. I mean, you have a control. It's Sonoma Cab, so it's different. So you can't really.
It's apples and oranges, basically.
In a way, yeah.
All I know is it's my kind of homework, because after you're done, then everybody brings a bottle of wine. They bring in pizzas, and of course, all of these vintners want to show off, want to one up everybody else. And so there's some really fabulous wines with your pizza, and it's good. It's good.
And so sometimes we are in sync with certain barrels, and then he'll say, I really like this barrel. I'm like, yeah, we started using it last year. And then this year he'll say, I didn't really care for it. And I'm like, but you loved it last year. It was your number one.
Yeah. That's why I'm not in charge.
That's why Victoria makes those final decisions.
But yeah, it depends on the fruit and how that barrel's interacting with that fruit.
So we do have the 2016 Atlas Peak Cab that's coming up, and it's going to be released in a few months. Anything you want to say about that, Victoria?
Well, it's, I guess we're right back up in production with that one. So so it's back closer to the blend that we typically, it's not a blend that we design, but we have determined that it kind of works where it's, no more than 8% Merlot and no more than 6% Petit Verdot, typically. It was a great growing season, nothing remarkable necessarily, as far as I don't recall any heat spikes or anything like that, but just a good growing season, a good amount of crop. And I think since 2013 is still my favorite Atlas Peak so far. And I think 16 is kind of up there with it. So
Oh.
I have to try it again.
Victoria 2013 Atlas Peak, I'm sure she'd be happy to take it off your hands.
It's so good. I get jealous every time like Ryan and Marcy do a post of their opening a 13. That's my favorite. But I don't, it's very, I think the fruit's different. Well, it's back to that cab blend, so it's heavier in cab. It's, from what I remember, it's just like a very juicy, very that blackberry, blueberry, dark fruit, little bit of rosemary. We had it, I think didn't we do a tasting a couple weeks ago? We didn't do one. Maybe I was just drinking it. I don't
We
know.
did it on the 2016 Napa Valley. But we
I
didn't-
think it's because I had to do it with the distributors. And so I got to try it then. So it's just, it's a very like lush version of Atlas Peak, I guess. You know, not as structured with the tannins, more fruit to it.
I don't know if we ever talked about this on any of the Wine Wednesdays, but I know there is a certain percentage of the Cabernet grape that has to be in your bottle in order to label the wine Cabernet.
That's 75%.
Say that again, 70?
75. And I think this is 76, this vintage. So it's really low for us for this blend.
When you see like some of our Napa Valley cab from the floor and Oak Knoll appellation, when the bottle says it's 100% Cabernet, it means it is only Cabernet. There's no other varietal put in that bottle to mix with that particular wine. So those are the kind of differentiating points that you would see on a bottle. But
And even with, I remember, I'm just going to go back to 2011 when we had that wet year. And in 2010 up on Atlas Peak, we had botrytis set in. So I had to harvest early because we had a lot of rain and we didn't really get the maturity that we wanted up there. And then going into 2011, I was like, what would be the backup plan? And to have an appellation, you have to have 85% of that fruit to make it Atlas Peak. And so I ended up blending just under 15% from Salvador, from that vineyard in Oak Knoll, just to have some sort of maturity where other people were adding concentrate and sugar to their wines that year. I just took ripe grapes from Salvador and did a co-fermentation with that. And I was just thinking back because we've been playing, now that we're kind of doing a Merlot, just playing with like putting a little bit cab to it, just seeing how it would add or take away. And like, I still would like to do this with you two, but I feel like the fruits don't match. Do you know what, like the
which
sub-appellations? So it's the Atlas Peak Merlot with the Napa Cab, because the Atlas Peak, we did the blend and that was that.
well, don't you
And so,
think that's related to the soil? More to the soil?
it is, and just that microclimate, but I mean, people make Napa Cabs from all over and they make, blend, but like when I felt it, I was like, this doesn't feel right. And so I was waiting to try it with you two at some point, just to see, if that's something that we'd want to do, like combine the vineyards. But I just felt like this doesn't match up, the fruit profiles.
About the addition of Petit Verdot, because I only think Petit Verdot added to a Cabernet to give it a darker, inkier look, or that's what I think of. But you have a better idea. You two probably have a better idea than I do. I just think of it in terms of the color, that Petit Verdot adds that darker, inkier color to the wine.
Definitely does that. I think it's got some good acidity to it, but all of the wines and the grapes from Atlas Peak and that Oak Knoll vineyard, they have pretty good acidity with pHs. So, but I think there's a spice that it adds to it. And starting in, so 2012, I believe, no, 2013, that was the first time we were able to incorporate all of the varieties up there and make the Atlas Peak blend. And I feel like after 2012, the wine shifted to like a little bit of that floral note. And I'm trying to determine, like, did the Petit Verdot give that, to the wine? Or, is it we use 4 clones of Cabernet that we weren't always using from the start? Like, was it clone 169 that's giving that floral component? Or is it the Petit Verdot? But I find like it gives spice and some acid, the color, of course, and maybe the floral component. Don't know. But I think it grows really well in those rocks up there.
It's interesting. It's all of those elements are very, when I was doing some research on the climate for the geology of the rocks in Atlas Peak, they were talking about the climate being exactly what you talked about. It's wetter winters, cooling breezes coming in from the bay and the ocean, that then help to bring down the high heat that you might get in the afternoon. We get cooler nights, so there can sometimes be a problem with frost, but we've not yet experienced it up here, so we're very fortunate that way. And that the climate predominantly overall, they were saying, was very similar to the climate in Bordeaux. And I know you've been to Bordeaux, Victoria. Would you characterize that as, would you say that's correct or close, or the experts are just blowing smoke?
Yeah. And speaking of Atlas Peak,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like that vineyard is one of the few cooler vineyards up. I've tasted maybe 2 other wines with similar flavor profiles, and I don't think they're the wines that don't have the higher alcohols, and maybe they are where we are, but I know that other locations on Atlas Peak get a lot higher and get riper fruits. So I wouldn't say that it's true for overall Atlas Peak. But I can tell you, like in 2010 and 11, like when it was those weird, wet, cooler years, that seemed to me, that was my experience in Bordeaux when I went in 2008. It was a very wet year, and they were combating botrytis there. So when that happened in 2010, I mean, I wasn't confident, but I had experienced it. So I just kind of followed their rule books to working with it. And it ended up working out. But that's what I mean, those are the only comparisons I can really make. I think they're getting warmer as well. So, maybe there is some sort of correlation in that way. It's getting warmer over there. They're having riper vintages that they're not used to, where here I'm kind of happy because now we can somewhat compete with Valley Floor Cab in that sense. I know it's not a Valley Floor Cab, but we were still doing a leaner style of it because it was cooler for us up there. Whereas, Howell Mountain, anywhere else on Atlas Peak, they were getting probably too, they were able to get the alcohols and like the texture that you get from the alcohols in the wines. And now we're able to kind of I don't want to like get close to that, but just give more to the wine, I guess. I think, I don't remember what our 2010 alcohol was, but it was probably like 12%. Do you remember? And 11 was similar.
Andy might. Nope, he doesn't remember either.
Yeah, it was really low.
It was close.
It was, yeah. And I remember the story that someone wrote to you, and they'd had the 2010 and they received the 2011. They said, 2010 was the best vintage you'd ever made. And I'm like, what?
Well, you have a few more vintages under your belt since then, so
Yeah.
you're up to 12, 13, so that does not surprise me. We have a lot of fog up here.
I'm just wondering if anybody has questions for Victoria.
Anybody have questions? Just type them in the chat. Or I can unmute you and we can talk. You're all unmuted, so whoever wants to speak can ask a question.
What do barrels cost?
Oh,
Look at the price.
well, it depends on if you give Victoria just free reign or if you actually look at her sheet.
Yeah, there was one year where Victoria and I went to taste.
Or if I take Chris shopping with me.
No, yeah, she took me shopping and boy, we came home, we said, we found the perfect barrel. And then Randy went through the pricing list and he went, oh yeah, you picked out the most expensive barrel on the entire list.
What would you expect, Randy?
Barrels are, they range anywhere from generally from $1,200 to $2,500 a barrel.
And are they single use?
Well, we tend to use them twice. And then after we've used them twice, we consider them neutral. And they're at that point, they're really just receptacles. They don't really impart much flavor. And we sell them to cheaper wineries or furniture makers and we typically get a robust $50 to $75 a barrel when we sell them. So it's one of the more painful parts of winemaking. You would think that they would have developed some really efficient way of recycling barrels, maybe hydroblasting the insides or power washing them and recharring them and stuff, but they really haven't.
I think they do.
We just haven't taken part in it.
Well, because the quality
Marcy
isn't the
has a
same.
question. Let me try to answer this. I was saying that the fruit profiles didn't match. Let's see. I'm trying to think of something that doesn't go together. I mean, grapes go together, but the flavors.
Well, the flavors of apples and oranges don't go together.
So similar to that in a way. It wasn't as bad, of course, but it didn't fit. Like I could feel it. And then I was like, maybe I gotta ask someone else because maybe I'm just, in my head.
That's why you're a winemaker and I'm not. I've never drank something and thought, this doesn't match together.
I know I said that to Michael because he wanted a case of the Merlot and I was saying, we're talking, Randy had asked me, try working with a little bit of cab, and we'd already done the blend for Atlas Peak. So the only cab available is the Salvador because that's always 100%. And I was like, it just didn't match. It didn't fit. He's like, yeah, I know. I get it. I was like, okay, good. So yeah.
I've never heard that phrase. Thank you for explaining a little bit more.
That's weird. Sorry.
The only thing you won't see is a 2017 Atlas Peak cab. Because of the fire, we lost over 35% of the vineyards up here. And that's why we made a Merlot, because the Merlot ripened before the cab. It was lower behind Randy's shoulder, farther down, and it ripened first. So Victoria picked it first, but we were a week away from harvesting the cab up there. And if you saw any of our posts or emails, we showed pictures of Victoria, Mario Bazan, our vineyard manager, and Randy in hard hats with lights on. They were only allowed to go into the vineyard from like 2 to 4 in the morning to go through the rows to try and salvage what we thought we could make into a Cabernet for that year. And we did pick about, what'd you say, 20% of what was left up there. And we put it through fermentation and into barrels. When we went back to taste it, it tasted like barbecue sauce. I mean, it didn't taste very good. So we decided to sell that one.
Barbecue is being nice.
I know. We could have made a barbecue sauce out of it, but I wasn't quite ready for that at that time, since we were dealing with
It
losing.
just kept changing.
Yeah, it just didn't taste. And now there are, there's plenty of vineyards from the 2017 fires who kept their wine, and even if it tasted a little off, they have actually, there's now good chemistry that you can add to those grapes to bring out take out the smoky flavor. And so, you know, that there are those, that's all chemistry, and that's what they do. And I think that's what's interesting about how winemaking is done, because it's really about chemistry, a lot of it. So,
On the concept of smoke taint, there are tests to show you components, like one of them is guaiacol, but that are supposedly indicia of whether the wine's going to have smoke taint, but they are not reliable. And so we felt like we had to actually make the wine to find out. And I remember very vividly, because I was really looking forward to tasting it. And Victoria poured some samples, and if you can see this glass, I don't know, but it was kind of like this, and hope, I'm hoping, and he went, oh my goodness, it felt like you stuck your nose in an ashtray. It wasn't good.
any other questions, anybody? Well, we're happy with the 2015, and because of that, our Wine Wednesdays, this 7th one, we've actually covered all the wines in our current Lobo portfolio. We're going to think about the future virtual endeavors, and we'll, as the country opens up, I don't know where you are or what's happening where you are, but we're cautiously opening up here and trying to stay optimistic. Later in the season, we hope by harvest, the expansion of the winery, expansion of the caves will be finished, and we'll be having a grand opening party at the caves by harvest time. And that's our goal anyway. And of course, you'll all be invited. So we hope that that will come to fruition. And also, I'm just gonna say, without saying what, check your email in the next couple of days, because there's a surprise coming your way.
Woohoo.
Something we uncovered, and we're passing it along to all of our PAC members and Alpha members. So just check your email for that little summer surprise. So
Thank you very much.
yes,
Great.
you will want it, and it's limited. So get in there and get it as soon as you can. I just want to say in closing that wine will always remind us of the need to be resilient in disasters that we can't control. And that's certainly been true for us. I know our Wine Wednesdays have moved up our cocktail time from 5 to 3. That's our resilience, and we're going to carry it through. And Randy said, don't finish off all your Atlas Peak because you have dinner tonight and it'll go well with your dinner.
What do you have?
I think he got me some meatballs and bucatini from Bricks.
Okay.
Restaurant Bricks that just opened in their patio today. So I told him to bring me back something that I could have for dinner. So that's what I'm looking forward to. So I think that we've covered just about everything on this wine. Anybody have anything else that they want to ask or say? We're glad.
Thank you, and stay safe.
Yes, be safe yourselves.
Thanks,
We've
Bob.
Thank you.
been hanging in there all this time.
Thank
And you
you.
got your shipments. Get your shipments? Have they come to you?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Everybody's gotten their shipments. That's a good thing. So you have some wine to drink. So that's good. So stay safe, be healthy, enjoy your afternoon. I know in a couple of places, I know our semi-cousin from back east in Virginia, he looked like he had pretty sunny weather. So on their patio, he looked like they were having dinner with their wine tonight. So we have very glorious weather here. So I'm looking forward to going outside with my next glass of wine.
Yeah. Glorious of 100 degrees.
Yeah, well, it is. It is definitely
Little
warm.
breeze.
Well, it's got to be warm in Sacramento too. So yeah,
Just 104.
I can see. And Texas should be warm. So
How's it in Orcas?
Beautiful.
Yeah. Couldn't be better.
65.
Oh, that's better than 104.
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure. Okay, everyone. Well, stay tuned for what's coming next on Virtual Encounters. We're going to try and keep it going. Everybody has some good ideas. Stay tuned. Check your emails for that little sweet summer surprise that'll be coming your way in the next day or two. And we'll see you all next time.
Thank
All right,
you.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Great to see everybody.
Bye.